You can hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you. I'm always enlivened by being with the Pandavasena, Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis. Your inspiration inspires me and so many others, so thank you so much. We'll begin with a little prayer. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvasesa Sunyavadi Pasyata Deshatane Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Hare Krishna. So the topic today is criticism and Vaishnava Aparadha. So the beautiful analogy is there in the Chaitanya Charitamrita by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. And he talks about the Bhakti Lata Bij. Bhakti Lata Bij is the seed of devotion. Bija means seed, and of course Bhakti is devotional service. So the seed of devotion is planted in the heart of the aspiring devotee by the spiritual master or by the spiritual master's representatives. And because of that seed being implanted in the heart, we have some kind of attraction for Krishna consciousness, for devotees, for the process of devotional service. And that attraction grows by the watering process, just like you plant a seed in fertile soil. And then if there's sunshine and proper watering, the seed becomes a seedling and then it gradually grows up and up. So similarly, by the process of hearing and chanting and remembering Krishna, and also by serving their lordships, serving the devotees of their lordships, this is the watering process that enables the Bhakti Lata Bij, the seed of devotion, to grow and grow. And this seed is so extraordinary because with the proper watering and the proper care, it can actually penetrate this material world. It can go past the coverings of this material world and actually enter the spiritual sky as Bhakti Lata Bij as it matures. But the problem is that just like a tender seedling in the ground, to continue the analogy, sometimes things can happen to it. It can become diseased and animals can come and attack it, so it must be protected. And so as far as the Bhakti Lata Bij, those enemies of that precious seed of devotion is Vaishnava Aparadha. That's considered like a mad elephant. If you allow a mad elephant to go into your garden, you can't expect the plants to survive very well. So similarly, with aparadha, with making offenses to the devotees, to the deities, to the Dham, to the holy name, this undermines the growth of this invaluable plant. So it's an important topic, and we can try to look at it from different points of view. One is that the devotee on the highest platform, or we can take Srila Prabhupada as an example, that devotee is very dear to Krishna. So just as Krishna is above criticism, so the devotee who is fully absorbed in serving Krishna, who is fully dedicated to preaching Krishna consciousness, teaching others how to engage in Krishna consciousness, that person also is above criticism. That we should not feel we have the liberty to criticize Vaishnavas of such a high caliber, just as we don't have the liberty to criticize Krishna. And we find in our pastimes that there were demoniac personalities who did criticize Krishna. Sishupal is a prominent example. And yeah, it's very unfortunate for that personality, as it would be unfortunate for us. And then from the devotee's point of view, there's different ways to understand. Like for myself, let's say, if I hear criticism of myself, then rather than becoming offended, taking personal offense, I can try to see, well, maybe there's some validity in the criticism. Maybe I should see it as, rather than criticism, see it as a way I can be corrected. And in that way, make it something positive. We have the extraordinary example from the Chaitanya Charitamrita that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had a person that he considered, by his age and by his initiation, he considered superior to himself in the pastime. That person's name was Ramachandra Puri. He was a disciple of Lord Chaitanya's spiritual master. And when he saw ants crawling around in Lord Chaitanya's place of residence, he said, "Oh, you're so-called sannyasi, you must be eating sweets." He came to that assumption. And it was just made up criticism. That Ramachandra Puri was insisting that the disciples or the followers of Lord Chaitanya ate too much. Lord Chaitanya himself was indulging himself improperly as a sannyasi. And so Lord Chaitanya did not react in an adverse way. It was very instructive, but rather he took it as a sannyasi, I should be renounced. So he corrected, so-called corrected himself, and he reduced his eating. And his devotees were appalled by this because he was not overeating. And yet Lord Chaitanya said, why are you criticizing Ramachandra Puri? He's saying a sannyasi should be renounced. I'm a sannyasi, so I want to be renounced. And in this way, he took it in a very humble way, which is so instructive for us. Rather than to feel offended and to perhaps retaliate, to return the criticism in some way, or to just become morose about it, we can take it either, if there's some justification, then we can take it, let me be corrected, and this is valuable. And if there's no justification, then we can ignore it and go on with our service. And if we have trouble distinguishing between those, we can ask someone who's a well-wisher of ourselves and see if they feel there's some validity in whatever that criticism was. And in that way, it's a way to grow from it, because even if we become immunized to criticism, in that the criticism is really coming from that person, it's not really valid in my life, then to have that kind of strength that not to be affected by it. We don't want to be affected by praise or by blame, by praise or by criticism. Rather neutral, that we do our service, focus on our service, and do it in the best possible way. And Prabhupada also instructed his disciples that sometimes he would criticize his disciples. And he said, don't take it as criticism, take it as correction. So in this way, it becomes valuable for us. It's a shift in our mentality that can help us, help the Bhakti Lata bead rather than hinder it. And another point Prabhupada made also is that if we say something that's truthful, it does not necessarily have to be taken as criticism. In other words, and to use the example that Prabhupada gave, if we say so-and-so is a thief and they actually are a thief, that's not criticism, that's a statement of fact, right? So that's another way to understand it, that there's a difference there. Criticism means that I'm tearing the person down. There's something perhaps in me that's envious, which is a very unfortunate mentality. And instead of trying to encourage the person, instead of seeing the good in the person, I'm undermining that person. So that's something we can look at in ourselves. that we certainly don't want to do that. We want to try to be constructive. We want to try to encourage us to fan the spark. Whatever spark is there of an inclination to devotion, we want to discover that spark and try to make it blaze. And criticism does the opposite. So it's very bad for us in terms of our own growth in spiritual life, and it's bad for the other person on the receiving end. So it's a lose-lose situation. And if we feel the urge to criticize, we should really look within ourselves and see, what is it that's forcing me to do that? If it's not something constructive, then we need to work on ourselves and try to get to the root of it, because it's so detrimental for our progress in spiritual life. It's very unfortunate. So yeah, if we're the object of criticism, we try to become unmoved by that. If it's nothing valuable there, just let it go, leave it aside, and focus rather on seeing the good in others, where this strengthens our bhakti lata bij. And on the other hand, another point that Prabhupada emphasized, which is very valid for all of us, is that he wanted his followers to be above social criticism. In other words, he wanted us to be ladies and gentlemen, so that when people see us and understand that we're devotees, they think well of us. They see, here's somebody who's honorable, who has values, who's hardworking, who's honest. And in this way, we properly represent Srila Prabhupada and his representatives. And it's a very positive way to push on Krishna consciousness. If people have respect for the behavior of the devotees and for their sincerity. So that's one point. Another type of way to undermine the bhakti lata bij is offenses against the holy name of the Lord. And this can be closely related to criticism, the Vaisnava Aparadha and the Nam Aparadha. I hope many of you or all of you know the 10 offenses against the holy name. We recite them every morning in the temple after Mangal Arti. But there's a wonderful way to look at these offenses to make them positive instead of negative. For example, the first offense is to blaspheme a devotee of the Lord. It's understood that great devotees are using their heart and soul to try to understand how to spread Krishna consciousness. And the Lord is very intolerant of offenses to such devotees. So the reverse of that, if you just flip it over, we want to glorify and appreciate devotees of the Lord. You can take that as the positive side to this. The second offense is to consider the names of the demigods to be equal to or independent of the names of Lord Krishna. So we look at the positive side of that, and that is to fully accept that Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead, and that there's nobody equal to him and no one greater than him. So in this way, we turn the negative and make it something positive. The third offense is to disobey the orders of the spiritual master. So we look at that and we can say the spiritual master is the bona fide representative of Krishna. He is so dear to Krishna. So we want to honor him by following his instructions, by molding our lives in such a way that he will be pleased by our activities, by our words, by our mentality also. Then the fourth offense here is to minimize the authorities of the scriptures, to blaspheming the Vedic literature and literature in pursuance of the Vedic version. So here again, we fully accept that the scriptures are divine instructions from Krishna. And we honor those scriptures by reading them, by discussing them, and by trying to follow them as best we can. Then another offense is to consider the glories of the holy name to be exaggerations. So this is comes with the realization, this can be avoided by the realization that the holy name of Krishna is Krishna himself. There's no difference between Krishna and his holy name. And therefore we chant the holy name with the attention and with reverence and with prayer, that we can be engaged in the service of the Lord for his pleasure. And the next one is to interpret the holy name of the Lord, to imagine a perverted meaning of it. So here we fully accept the scriptural definition, the scriptural explanation of Krishna's holy name. We don't try to imagine any other meaning or interpret it in any way. The seventh offense is considered the most egregious offense, the greatest of all offenses, and that's to commit sin on the strength of chanting. So the opposite of that is to follow the rules and regulations to avoid sin for Krishna's pleasure. In other words, we know that we will displease Krishna and will certainly displease him in form of his holy name if we act sinfully in this lifetime. And therefore, if we can live a pious life in the mode of goodness, then gradually we can transcend the modes altogether and actually begin to taste the sweetness of Krishna's holy names and the sweetness of serving him with our body and mind and words. And the eighth of these offenses is to consider the chanting of the holy names of the Lord as one of the ritualistic activities offered in the Vedas. So again, we look at the positive side, and this is to see that the holy name of the Lord is transcendental, just as the Lord is. It is completely beyond the modes of material nature. And by chanting the holy names with attention, by trying to focus our minds on the holy name, by chanting at an auspicious time of day in a place where we're not distracted, then we can please the Lord in this way and come to understand that he is completely transcendental to this material nature, to material energy. The ninth offense is to instruct the glories of the holy name to the unfaithful. So this is easily transposed into something positive, that we discuss the holy name with those who have some faith, for those who are not blasphemous, those who are not atheistic. And this gives pleasure to the Lord and certainly pleasure to our own hearts, solace to our own hearts. And as we do this, our own understanding of Krishna consciousness grows. We have realizations that we can share with others, and they share their realizations with us, and it becomes something very relevant to our lives. And then the 10th offense here is to be attached to material things in spite of chanting the holy name. So here, we want to become increasingly attached to Krishna, and then without further effort, our attachment to material things will decrease and decrease. We'll get this higher taste. It's mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, param drištva nivartate, that once we get this taste for Krishna consciousness, then we'll see the futility of the activities of this material world, and not that we become negligent to our material activities, to our material responsibilities, but we understand that there's something much more important, something much higher, and we take that very seriously. In other words, we have some kind of perspective in our lives where Krishna consciousness is the first and foremost responsibility, and then we act materially, we do what we need to do to the very best of our ability It's not that we shirk our ability or ignore it in any way, but we understand that the supermost responsibility for ourselves is to advance in Krishna consciousness. And our material activities are a way to support that advancement so that our minds can be peaceful, so that the people who are superior to us in our lives, our parents perhaps, or dependent upon us, are satisfied with our activities. Otherwise, the mind is so disturbed that we can't function properly. And that includes our chanting may be disturbed, our service at the temple may be disturbed, our relationship with our friends, devotee friends may be disturbed if we neglect our responsibilities, our duties in this world. And then finally, the additional one is also to be inattentive while chanting. So as we reorganize our lives or organize our lives around the priority of Krishna consciousness and of chanting, we can reduce our inattention. For example, if it's at all possible to chant in the early morning, that time is quite conducive for clarity in chanting. The bustle of the world is not quite started yet. Things are more peaceful. And it's at Brahma Muhurta hour is a very special time. I think probably all of you have experienced that personally. So those are some thoughts regarding the turning these negative, offenses into something positive. Let's see, we can perhaps just read a little bit. I have a letter here that Srila Prabhupada wrote that will be relevant, I hope, and then we can have some time for discussion about these points. This is a letter it was written to Madhu Mangala in November of 1972. My best advice to you is to strictly observe these things yourself and be the example so that all others may follow. We should not criticize each other as Vaishnavas because there is fault in everyone, and we may ourselves be subject to criticism. Best thing is to be above suspicion ourselves, and then if we see discrepancies and make suggestions, the others will automatically respect and take action to rectify matters. That is cooperation. And we must exist on such cooperation, otherwise the whole thing is doomed if we simply go on fighting over some small thing. So try to organize things and preach together in this spirit, and that will please me very, very much. So Prabhupada is saying that as conditioned souls, we will have faults. There's no question about that. So it's a matter of how we deal with each other's faults. And as I was trying to say, we want to do that in as constructive a way as possible. So certainly we don't want to speak behind other people's backs. That's very hurtful and destructive. Rather, if there's something constructive we can say it in a way that's palatable to the other person, that's gentle, that's sensitive, and hopefully that's helpful to the other person. And if we can't say it in that way, we shouldn't say it at all. We shouldn't feel compelled to say it. If we can't say it in a way that will actually be help the other person improve. So that's a very important point. And the idea is that we all gradually overcome our various flaws and weaknesses and help each other do that. And then this cooperative spirit is there. And if we don't take that, Prabhupada says the whole thing is doomed. If we simply go on finding flaws with each other and nitpicking in that way, we become discouraged and disheartened and don't taste the sweetness that is there in Krishna consciousness. So it's quite important, this whole subject of aparadha and criticism and how to avoid it and deal with it in a way that is constructive rather than destructive. So maybe there's some points we can discuss.
Thank you so much, Visakha Babu. Do you have some questions that I think have come privately? Brenda, do you have one?
I've got one, but before we go on to the anonymous question, shall we just ask if anyone else wants to ask those questions personally? So does anyone want to ask their question personally to Visakha Babu? We can use either the raise your hand or just unmute yourself.
I think Drashti sent a question in.
Yeah, I can go if anyone else doesn't want to.
Go for it.
Okay, thanks. Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much. My question was that it's very natural for us to like become really defensive when we're taking criticism in the moment. So what can we do to like you know, control that when it's actually happening in the moment, because we can reflect on it afterwards, but it's really like hard to control it there and then. So yeah.
Well, that's a very good question, very practical question. Thank you. Yeah, I think it is the reflex reaction is to become defensive. I think certainly for me and maybe for many of you. And I think time is a great instrument we can use in our service. Krishna is time, he says. So just like I was taking, or I am still taking, the ISKCON communication course from Bhaktivedanta College in Belgium. It's given by Anutama Prabhu. So one of the things that he pointed out is that if we receive an email that makes us upset in some way, he says you can write an answer, you write your answer, but don't send it for 24 hours. You wait 24 hours, and he says, guaranteed, when you come back in 24 hours, you're going to change the wording so it's not so volatile, you know, it's not so harsh. So similarly, when it's more difficult, but still the same principle is there when we're hearing criticism. Rather than blurting out something defensive or something maybe offensive to the other person, try to take a deep breath. You know? And if you can extract yourself from the situation, that's best. Because again, in time you can see, well, maybe there was a little bit of validity to what that person was saying. Or maybe there wasn't, and then you cannot be so reactive. You don't have to react. In other words, you can be neutral, not impacted, as I was saying, by praise or by criticism. And that's much, much better than saying things that later we will regret. Because, you know, once the words are out, you can't take them back. It's like when you press send, you might have 30 seconds when you can cancel, and after that, it's sent. It's in the other person's box. So similarly, even more so with words, you don't have even 30 seconds to take them back. So better just try to remove yourself and get a little perspective on it. And yeah, if there's someone around that you can ask, you know, is there any validity to this? That also can help. But first thing I think is time. A 24-hour principle that Anutama Prabhu gave, I think I've had experience that is actually true. After 24 hours, I'll come back, and those words that are trigger words, I'll change them so they're more acceptable and polite.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I think Carolyn, you raised your hand. Do you want to ask a question?
Haribol, thank you so much for your class, Prabhu. I always really love hearing from you. It's really practical and helpful. I had a question about internal criticism, because I feel like, you know, it's obviously a bit easier to sort of stop yourself from, you know, saying something to someone else or, you know, letting it out. But sometimes you start to like internalize it, and then every time you see that person, maybe you're like building up a sort of internal resentment towards them. And so it's, and I know that internal offenses are, you know, still offenses as well. So how would you suggest you deal with that kind of those feelings?
Thank you. That's a very practical question. That sometimes those things are just niggling in the heart and you can't let them go. They just seem to stay there. And so one thing to do, if you have that relationship with the person, to explore that part of that person that you find that you think might be negative in some way. And you might find that the person has, very often we find the person has something in their past, you know, some experience, some relationship that created that apparent thing that you've been criticizing, the character flaw or the activity flaw. And so in that way, rather than criticize, you can have sympathy for that person. I've seen that in myself, like there's a young woman in the ashram who was creating troubles, and then it would subside, and then again, there'd be troubles. And then some of the other residents of the ashram were explaining to me this person's past and the pain that they experienced. And so then it had a totally different effect. You know, the classic example is that this was published in a book, so it's very well known, you may have heard of it, but a man comes onto a subway in New York City, and the subway cart is empty except for one other man who's there and about 4 children who are running around the cart and the subway cart wildly, jumping on the seats and screaming. And the man who's responsible is just sitting there, just ignoring them, just lost in himself, you know. And so the man who just entered the subway car watches this for a bit, and then he becomes quite disturbed. And he finally goes up to the man who's sitting there with his head down while the children are running around crazily. And he said, "Can't you be responsible for your children? You know, I mean, this is not acceptable behavior." And the man looks up and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. We've just come from the hospital and their mother passed away." And so all of a sudden, the reality of the situation changed for the newcomer, you know, and he realized that they had gone through this incredible trauma, and the husband was traumatized, the children, you know, it was just, the reality was completely shifted. So similarly, a conversation with the person, you may understand their own behavior and their own mentality in a different way, and that can be very helpful in being forgiving for them and seeing them in a positive light.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm getting an influx of questions, but they're all anonymous. So I'll start by trying to pair together one of the other ones. Okay, so one may try to see good qualities in everyone, but how can one maintain that thought of seeing good in everyone, even though knowing that someone may not have been genuine in the process of bhakti and has caused pain to others knowingly or unknowingly?
Yeah, that's very difficult. Unfortunately, there have been devotees or so-called devotees that have caused tremendous pain to other devotees. And it's a very, very difficult situation, not to be taken in a light way, not to be casually dismissed or insensitively dismissed. Rather, that pain can be very, very deep. And I think that if it is something traumatic that a devotee has suffered, professional help might be required. And certainly the devotee who is in some way, you know, not doing small offenses, but great offenses, needs to be severely rectified. That's why we have this child protection team, so that they can really rectify people who have hurt students in our movement. And that's a very valuable service, a very necessary service. And for those who have been hurt, they should get all the help that they need to overcome it. The psychology can be very, very difficult to deal with, very deep. So yeah, it's a major, in our past, it has been a major problem. We hope now that we're getting beyond it and protecting the young people more and vetting the people that come so that they don't have access to do that kind of harm. But all we can do is say we were so immature in our past, and we've learned from it, and we pray ardently that we don't forget those lessons. And we have to offer our just deepest apologies to those young people that were hurt by the system that we were so oblivious to. I myself, my husband and I filmed in the Gurukul in Dallas in 1973. We made a film called The Hare Krishna People. I don't know if any of you seen it. It's very old now, but yeah, so we were in Dallas in 1973. We spent some days there, and I saw the children, I saw the teachers. I had absolutely no idea what was going on there until decades later. And it was just abhorrent. It was just abhorrent. And I felt so blind, just absolutely blind. My body was there, my mind was there, but I didn't know at all what was going on. So yeah, I felt terrible about that. So yeah, my apologies for that kind of pain.
Thank you, Visakha. We have another question that's come anonymously. What are the best ways to go about rectifying an offence that we've committed in the past?
Yeah. Well, we have the example from the Bhagavatam, a wonderful example of Ambarish Maharaj and Durvasa Muni, that Durvasa Muni greatly offended Ambarish Maharaj, who was a wonderful, wonderful devotee, completely surrendered to Krishna. And as a result of this offense by Durvasa Muni, he was chased by Lord Krishna's Sudarshan Chakra. And he went all over the universe trying to find forgiveness for his offense. He went to Lord Shiva, he went to Brahma, and they said they could not do anything for him. And so finally he went to Narayan himself and said, what can I do? I'm being chased by the Sudarshan Chakra for my offense to Maharaj Ambarish. And Narayan himself said, there's nothing I can do. You must go to Maharaj Ambarish and ask his forgiveness. The Lord himself could do nothing. So Durvasa Muni did that. He went back to Ambarish Maharaj and fell at his feet, offering his obeisances with sincerity and apologies, asking for forgiveness. And immediately Ambarish Maharaj forgave him. There was no harboring of any resentment on the part of this great devotee, Ambarish Maharaj. So that gives us a hint that if we have offended someone, we should go back to that person and sincerely and humbly apologize, ask for forgiveness, and pray that they will find it in their heart to forgive, because that is the only way that it can be accomplished, to overcome offenses. And the devotee relationship is so wonderful that a devotee like Ambarish Maharaj, again, he sets the example, and he, without a moment's hesitation, he immediately forgave Durvasa Muni. So that is something so beautiful and sweet about devotees that we can relish and try to emulate ourselves.
Before going on to the next question, just a follow-up question from that, which I received earlier. What would you do if you can't actually ask for forgiveness from that person? Maybe if they're not around or there's no relationship with them.
Well, we can express our feelings to Krishna. And if there's a relative of that person who's aware of the difficulty, we could express it to that relative or friend of the person. But the essence is that we want to sincerely and seriously and humbly know that we have made a mistake and we're asking for forgiveness. That is the essence. If we can't do it to the person, at least we can present that to Krishna, that if this person were here, I would go to the person and beg for forgiveness from him or her. I cannot do that. The person is absent, so I'm praying to you, my Lord, that that person will forgive me for my transgressions, and that will give us great relief. If it's done in an honest way, it will give great relief to our hearts.
Thank you. The next question that's come through says, when working on different projects and services with lots of ideas, how can we cooperate and try and serve to the best of our ability without causing offenses or conflicting with others due to lots of different ideas?
Yeah, that's a very practical question as well, very important question. What we have found was that we have what's called brainstorming sessions, where everyone can put their ideas out, and there's no question of vetting those ideas or criticizing the ideas, just the ideas are there. They may at first appear crazy, they might appear undoable, or whatever, they're all out into the ether, onto the table. And then together, as a cooperative body, as Prabhupada was saying in this letter to Madhusudana, we do it in a cooperative way and sift through and see, have criteria, what will work, what we can do, what's practical. And it may be that there could be different teams. One will work on one idea that they're inspired by, and another will work on another idea that they're inspired by. But I think what we need to keep foremost in our minds is that we want to encourage others. We don't want to undermine others or in any way lessen their enthusiasm, their inspiration. And I think if we keep that in our minds, then we can be successful in having so many ideas and coming out with something that actually is helpful and doable. But if we have this idea that is some kind of competition, then that can destroy that mood of mutual inspiration and encouragement.
Thank you so much. Neha, do you have any popping up? Okay, I've got another one. So how do I know what is justifiable self-criticism and what isn't? What is the line between good criticism towards yourself?
Yeah, sometimes that's hard to know. That we may be just undermining ourselves because we don't have much confidence in ourselves. We may be criticizing ourselves unnecessarily. And this is the point where a close friend can be so helpful, because someone who's a little bit objective, but really our well-wisher, really wants the best for us, if we can reveal to that person, I feel very inept in this particular way, what do you think? And that person can say, no, actually, you have a really good start. You just have to perhaps learn a little more, have a little bit more practice. And in this way, we can get some perspective over it so that we're not undermining our own attempts and defeating ourselves with self-criticism, because that can be very detrimental and unproductive, you could say, unproductive. If we have so much doubt of ourselves. Rather, we want to feel that wherever we are, we can improve, we can get better at it with practice and with instruction, and that our friends are there to help us. That's what part of being a friend is, to say, in this way you're doing really well, and another way you need a little bit of attention. But I could go back to this communication course, and for one of the lessons we had to make a little YouTube video, 2-minute YouTube video. Say we had a bunch of topics we could be talking about. We had to pick one topic, and then a bunch of audiences. So we picked one topic to speak to one audience. We made a 2-minute video. And then Anutama Prabhu was instructing us that we had to critique the videos of the other students. And he said very specifically how to do this. He said, you start off with something positive. That, you had a great smile. At the beginning, you really caught my attention. And then you say something negative. You say, you really spoke too fast. You have to slow down. And then you say something positive. Like, you made great points about the purpose of ISKCON, or whatever it is. So he said it's like a sandwich. You go positive, negative, positive. And in this way, the person feels some self-confidence that they're doing something right. And they have some nugget, okay, I can improve in this area. So I think that's a very helpful technique for each other as well. that if we go and emphasize the positive, that's again fanning the spark, so important. And then also we're learning ways that we can improve.
Thank you so much. Another question that's come anonymously. How can we stop taking offense and practically see the good in people when we feel a bit tested? How can we make sure we don't dwell on the negativity?
Yeah, that's very difficult not to take offense when we're criticized. But again, what we want to do is see if there's some nugget in that criticism whereby we can say it's not criticism, which is very negative, but rather it's correction. Correction can be positive. Just like we went through the 10 offenses, and instead of seeing them in a negative way, to blaspheme the pure devotee, instead of seeing it that way, we want to glorify and be grateful for the pure devotees spreading the names of the Lord. So similarly in criticism, rather than saying, oh gosh, everything I tried to do, it didn't work out. But find some nugget in there. Okay, maybe I can improve in this way. So the person hasn't offered it in this, what I was saying, the sandwich of positive, negative, positive. But you're going to take out the little bit, maybe, that I can improve. This is a way I can grow. So it's a matter of changing our mentality. And if we find that maybe it's criticism and there's no validity, so then we need to have the strength to ignore it. And that takes a lot of strength, but the examples are there in our scriptures. There's this personality called Jud Bharat, and he wanted in his lifetime just to focus on transcendence. And so to enable himself to do that, in this world, he acted like someone who was Jud. The word Jud means stone-like. So he just did not respond. And even though he was severely criticized by his relatives, they thought he was just stupid. But actually, he was a great transcendentalist. He did not let it affect himself. He did not let praise or blame. In his case, there was no praise. There was only blame and criticism. He simply did not let him affect himself. So that's a very high standard, but it's something that we can be aware of. This is possible for us. If there is no validity in the criticism that I am receiving, then just let it go, like water off a duck's back, as they say. Water on a lotus, a drop of water on a lotus leaf. It just slips right off. And that is a very liberating situation to be in, rather than to be weighed down by it, to be depressed. These things are not helpful. And that's, again, close friends are just invaluable. If we have this question, I've been criticized, what do I make of it? We go to somebody who is really wants the best for us and say, this is what was said of me. What do you think? And an honest friend will say, there's very little there that you can learn from, but you might try X. And then, okay, this way I can improve. So try to turn it around, just like we turned around the 10 offenses. Turn it around into something positive so that we can grow together.
Thank you so, so much. We have another question. How do we know when something may be deemed as critical versus something good for us to know?
I'm not sure I understood that question.
Not sure either.
I think when the person sent that, they were saying that it's deemed, so something that someone said to us, it can either be criticism or it can be something that's really good for us to know. For example, if it's possibly about I think it's possibly if it's about someone else, so it was leading on to gossip.
So yeah, that's what I was trying to say. If we have a well-wisher in our lives, we may not have the perspective to understand, is this criticism accurate or is it just, useless? But if we go to somebody that's close to us, that we trust and respect, they can help us sort that out so that we can find that nugget in whatever was said, that instead of being hurtful, is something that we can use to improve ourselves. I think that's a very important part of our growth. And that comes from close friendships. Those of you who have close friends are very, very fortunate, because you can help each other in this way and support each other. Well-wisher. Prabhupada signed all his letters, "Your ever well-wisher." So that's what we all need in our lives, ever well-wishers. They're not going to undermine us. They're not going to distract us. Rather, they're going to help us protect this very precious Bhakti Lata Bij so it can grow and grow and grow. At the end of the growth of the Bhakti Lata Bij, it wraps this creeper of devotion wraps itself around the lotus feet of Radha and Krishna, and then it bears the fruit of love of God in the spiritual world. So it's something that we all want to protect and nurture with our life breath.
Thank you. Last couple of questions. How detrimental would you say gossip is?
Gossip is very detrimental. It's the word itself, you can feel the futility of it. That it means we're not addressing the person that we're talking about, but rather two people are getting together and just, it's called prajalpa in Sanskrit, just uselessly exchanging thoughts that are generally not complimentary about someone. And in that way, it really pollutes the mentality, because when you see that person, you'll think about all these statements that have no constructive value, no Krishna conscious value, and undermine not only ourselves, our own mentality, but that mentality in a subtle way will affect those around us, like gossip. So it's very unhelpful. We should not say to anyone what we cannot say in front of the person himself or herself. In other words, we should be very straightforward in our dealings. And if we have some feeling about someone, as I was saying, we should be able to express that in a way that is polite and respectful and sensitive, and get to know that person better, rather than speaking behind their backs and polluting our own mentality. It's one of the ways to destroy the Bhakti Lata Bij, for sure.
Thank you so much. Sorry, another question. Why do I become defensive or offended when I'm criticized? What is the root cause of this, and how can I overcome it?
Yeah, it's a tendency of all of us to become defensive when we're criticized. And I think it's because the false ego is there, because of this presence of the false ego. We want to think very highly of ourselves. We don't want to think that we're full of flaws and faults and a proper subject of criticism. And therefore, to protect the false ego, rather than correcting ourselves, we want to lash out at the person who is criticizing us. So it's a very natural response in conditioned souls, certainly in me, to be so defensive and perhaps return the criticism rather than to take a deep breath and try to understand the criticism in a positive way. So yeah, as Prabhupada explained, we have these propensities of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And the defending refers to just what we're talking about, that someone, it can also refer to physically defending ourselves, but also in this emotional way, in this subtle way, defending ourselves from criticism. And Prabhupada had one servant, Shruti Kirti Prabhu, and sometimes Prabhupada would tease him and criticize him in some way for something he was doing, correct him in that way. And Shruti Kirti Prabhu would not defend himself. Some of other Prabhupada's other servants would defend themselves and try to explain why they did something or justify what they did. And Prabhupada told Shrutakirti Prabhu, you're not fun because you don't speak up, you don't defend yourself. In other words, it was a little bit of a tease there. But that's part of defense. This eating, sleeping, mating, and defending is that we want to defend our self-image and not have our self-image undermined by other people's negative thoughts about us. So we have to look at that honestly and try to see how we can improve in that way.
Thank you so much. We have a few questions left. Is that okay?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So one of the questions was, whenever I have something negative to say about a devotee, even when it's subjective, there's a feeling of guilt. How do you handle this? For example, if I was giving feedback to someone else about an ISKCON course and that it wasn't great in my opinion, but I feel really bad saying that.
So we can look inside ourselves and see the motive, try to see the motive for what we're doing. And if the motive is positive, say it's a course and we want to see the course improve, then we can know that this is constructive. It's called constructive criticism rather than destructive criticism. And again, if we can couch it in positive things, this part of the course was very inspiring, very fresh for me. I really enjoyed it. But this part of the course, it dragged on. It didn't come to a proper conclusion. So again, if we can couch it, so at the end the person feels encouraged rather than discouraged, then we've done a service, a positive service. But if the end, when we present our critique, the person feels depressed or something, then we know we haven't done it properly. We have to learn how to offer this constructive criticism. So the person says, yeah, I have a start here, but there's some ways I can improve. And if I go on, it'll become more and more effective, of course, like that. So there's an art, just as there's an art to receiving criticism, there's a very important art to giving criticism. So that it can be not only heard by the person, it's given in a sensitive way, but also given in a way that the person feels, yes, I'm going to improve. Not that, oh, forget it, I can't do this, I'm going to do something else. So, yeah.
Thank you. We have the last question. If I see someone committing Vaishnava Aparadha, is it my duty to correct that person? If we hear someone criticizing another person, how should we respond?
Mm-hmm. And actually it's stated that if we hear criticism, the correct thing to do is to immediately leave that place. There's different, there's the example, if you've read in the Bhagavatam, there's an example of Sati. Sati was the daughter of Daksha. And Daksha was very critical of Lord Shiva, who was Sati's husband, who was Daksha's son-in-law. And Sati was so mortified by hearing this criticism of her husband, who was a faultless Vaishnava from her father, who was a fault finder, that she self-immolated herself. It's an amazing pastime. But she was very advanced in yoga, and she was able to sit down, and from the fire in her body, she could evoke that. So she herself burned up in those flames, which of course inflamed Lord Shiva, and he lost his wife, and created total havoc for Daksha. But the point being that we don't want to tolerate criticism. And the best thing to do is be an example ourselves of not criticizing others, of not creating aparadhas. And if we're in the area where aparadhas are being committed, then it's, rather than jump on the person, oh, you're making an aparadha, this is terrible, that very often will backfire, I found. If we can't do that properly so that the person will be able to receive that, we should be responsible enough to leave that place and just go on in an undisturbed way in our minds. And perhaps at another time, if the time and place and circumstance are right, in a gentle way, we can express what we're feeling to the person to see if there's any understanding that maybe this was improper use of words. So yeah, it's a difficult position to be in, and we certainly want to protect ourselves from hearing Vaishnava Aparadha, to speak of participating in it. And we don't want to commit more Vaishnava Aparadhas in that environment, so we have to be careful, very careful. And at the very least, just remove ourselves if we can't improve the situation.
Do you think we have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay. In this body, we have inherent qualities and also inherent flaws. To what extent can we truly correct these flaws? For example, how do we strike a balance between being kind to ourselves and understanding our conditioning and strongly trying to eliminate these flaws by focusing on them continually?
Very nice question. Thank you so much. Very thoughtful question. But I think within what Prabhupada has given us in his teachings and his example is very, very exalted. The bar, as they say, is set very high in terms of our character, our values, our ethics, our morality. You know, the 26 qualities of a devotee, my goodness, the bar is so high. But to speak of the cleanliness that he expects of us, our relationship with devotees, with non-devotees, with family. So yeah, it's to be expected that we're not going to come to that standard right away, for sure. So what do we do? There's this constant tension between what I would like to be and what I am. And these are continually pulling at us, you know, the standard that is there that I'm aware of from the Bhagavatam, from Srila Prabhupada's life. And here I am way down here, so what to do? So one thing we don't want to do is become depressed by our situation, because that is just totally unhelpful. What we want to do is try to remain always positive. There's a beautiful verse in the 11th canto, I think it's the 20th chapter, 28th verse, if I remember, that the devotee will fail in attaining this very high standard. But the devotee remains positive, knowing that Krishna is very kind, he's very forgiving. He wants me to come to him, even more than I want to come to him. And as long as I remain serious and sincere and continue trying, then success will be there over time. So not to become so down on ourselves, you know, I've failed in this way, I've failed in that way. We can become overwhelmed. We can allow ourselves to become, we don't want that to happen. We want to have this hope that despite my failings, despite my bad background, despite my lack of taste, despite all these things, still, somehow or other, Krishna, somehow or other, Srila Prabhupada, I want to please you. And if we have that sincere hope, that sincere desire, surely they will be there to help us. And we'll taste the joy of Krishna consciousness despite our failings and flaws.
Thank you so, so much. I think that was such a nice note to kind of leave the call on. Just want to say thank you, Visakha Prabhu. Thank you for always giving us your time, for being so honest, real, and relatable to us. We're so, so grateful for you. And thank you everyone that joined. I think, Brenda, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in Padmasana, most of you know Janaki and Jasmine Desai. Currently, their mum has been suffering from cancer for over a year now, and she's actually just been admitted into hospital again last week, and things are looking a little bit more difficult than they were previously. So she's just asking, and their family's just asking that please, please, please do keep them in your prayers. Keep the family and her mum especially in your prayers. They're wonderful devotees, and they've been serving Bhaktivedanta and obviously in Padmasana for a really, really long time. So yeah, just to keep them in your prayers, even if you don't know them, just say a little prayer for them. But yeah, thank you.
Oh, we have the verse in the chat now. Nilamani Prabhu put the verse in the chat.
Thank you.
Oh, it's the 20th chapter, 11, 20, 27, 28. Shall I read it before we say goodbye?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Nilamani Prabhu. Having awakened faith in the narration of my glories, being disgusted with all material activities, knowing that all sense gratification leads to misery, but still being unable to renounce all sense enjoyment, my devotee should remain happy and worship me with great faith and conviction. Even though he is sometimes engaged in sense enjoyment, my devotee knows that all sense gratification leads to a miserable result, and he sincerely repents such activities.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Once
much.
again, thank you so much, Visakha Prabhu.
Thank you so much. All glories to your service. I look forward to having your company once again.
Definitely.
Thank you for inviting me into your Sangha.
Thank you. Everyone's welcome to unmute and say thank you.
Yeah.
Just before we go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
All glories to the Pandavasena.
Bye.